Oh,
Hey,
well, okay. Hi, everyone.
hi.
This was not supposed to be the way that I was going to introduce Ian, but okay. So, on today's episode, we're going to talk about insomnia and other
Hey, Bo.
sleep. I don't know what the word would be. Sleep troubles, sleep. Mm, yeah,
Sleep
okay.
issues.
Sleep issues, exactly. So Veda and I came up with this idea during one of our sleepless nights. And we were like, well, it was supposed to be the Haps night, theme. And we were like, well, we should like talk about insomnia while, sleepless at 4 a.m. Um, and then we were like, but we also could add the scientific neuro brain part of it and maybe explain a little better why it happens, because I
Yeah,
can tell you how it happens to me. Veda can tell you why it happens to her, but I think there must be some sort of explanation that people can stop saying, Lucia, you just need to relax. And it's like, no, it's not that easy. So
chances are
yeah.
you know someone with insomnia that they've had since they were a kid. They've probably tried close to almost all suggestions that they've come across, but we'd like to learn what's happening to our minds. So we found, well, we didn't really find him, but neuroscientist Ian McLaughlin to, maybe give us some insight onto what the heck is going on.
So here's Ian. It was the part when I was supposed to put him on the screen, but
He's already
this,
here.
You couldn't
Perfect.
get rid of me. So hi
no.
everybody. My name is Ian McLaughlin, and I have a PhD in neuroscience. And my research focused on trying to map out which specific neurons in the brain are responsible for when we feel anxious, and if those same neurons also regulate addiction to drugs like nicotine, alcohol, and opioids. And I've also been pretty thoroughly terrible at sleeping ever since I hit puberty. So sleep has always been this kind of like mystifying superpower that some of my friends had over the years. And my wife, for example, she can fall asleep in like 2 minutes, even if she's in the same room as I am with my like super loud clicky keyboard, which by the way, box whites for any keyboard nerds. Um, and I should also emphasize that I am a scientist, right? I'm not a physician. And so anybody who's confronting sleep disturbances really ought to consult with a physician who, has experience treating insomnia and sleep difficulties. And, I suspect we'll explore that together. And it is extremely challenging. But anyways, that's me. And also, while I was doing my research, all of my most successful experiments were the product of work that I did after the sun went down and before it rose. I'm curious about you two. Do you feel more productive when it's nighttime?
Yes, yes, definitely. I wake up always usually pretty groggy, very exhausted, and then I feel like right around 8 p.m. I suddenly am a human. And I try not to like continue my activities into the evening, but that is when I am most like present with it, and I don't know.
Comfortable.
What about
Like
you,
when
Lucia?
the world is silent, I feel like, okay, now I can do whatever my brain wants me to do. And it's like, well, this is not how it's supposed to be. But
Mhm.
yeah, nighttime has always been back in college when I was doing studying architecture. I had a lot of friends that went to sleep and woke up like at 4 or 5 a.m. And I was like, no, 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 no. There's no way my anxiety is gonna let me fall
Yeah,
asleep. So I
school
would just
is tough
go
for
all
that reason.
night and I would sleep when I'm done. And
Yeah,
here I am.
yeah.
Yeah, same here. Okay, so I think it might make sense. And I should note that is pretty common among people who struggle to sleep. And there's this whole topic of chronotypes that we can talk about. But before we get into some of the more granular details, I think it might make sense to chat about like sort of broadly what we know about sleep, just to begin with. And so first of all, this is a topic that's caused me a fair bit of trepidation. As a parent of a 2.5-year-old daughter, the timing, the quality, and the resulting neurobiological activity play a massive role in how the brain develops early on. And so, like, by that I mean, if a very young child just isn't getting very much sleep, or is gonna sleep at unpredictable times of night, particularly at that age, they need so much sleep, like 12 plus hours. That most definitely has an impact on how the rest of the brain functions. And sleep is it's one of those things that I think the vast majority of people, certainly in the United States, but I don't think it's unique to the United States, I think underestimate in many ways, from its importance to its complexity, as well as like how difficult it can be for some people to achieve it. And so the way I like to think about things like sleep, from the perspective of how it works in the brain, you can think of it sort of like as a very precisely made watch, right? Where you look at a watch face and it's pretty simple, right? I'm talking about like old school analog watches. You just see like 2 or 3 arms moving around a disc with numbers on it. Not super complicated. Sometimes there are extra gizmos and gadgets, but that's the essence of it, right? It's just a clock. But under the hood, right, one way to think about sleep and the way that a watch works, under the hood, there are like tons of gears and components and spinny things, minuscule screws that I happen to know are quite minuscule because I actually use them in my own research, and I could only get them from one specific place in France, which is super frustrating. But anyways, this watch has like a particularly fancy gyro tourbillon, or tourbillon, I think is how you pronounce it. But anyways, with all of those components, if one component is damaged or it's not perfectly compatible with the rest of the watch components, you got a problem, right? The watch will be slow, or it'll be fast, or it'll just stop working altogether. And given how complex human sleep is, there's kind of a similar dynamic at play. And so, if one part of the complicated constellation of brain activity, involved in transitioning from waking to sleeping is disrupted, you get disturbed sleep. And because there are so many components of how it happens in the brain as we try and fall asleep, there are many ways to arrive at disturbed sleep, right? Sleep deprivation, insomnia, stuff like that. And it's just one of those things that I think is very, very simple to a lot of people. But just like almost everything we take for granted, it is incredibly complicated. And so, like another thing, to another comparison would be like what it takes for me to lift this pen, right? It's about as simple of an action as any human can execute, assuming that, you're not injured. But, ask somebody who's just had a stroke and part of the brain that affects their ability to control all these muscles involved in lifting up a pen, or, if they've had, damage to parts of the brain that control our ability to walk, like ask them, they literally have to spend months and months relearning how to walk, because something as simple as getting up and walking over to your refrigerator to get some fizzy water or whatever requires this massive cascade of intricate and precisely integrated signaling, to enable you to get thirsty in the first place, to know where to go, and then to enable you to sequence all of these graceful movements in just the right order so you don't trip over, right? That's it. Similar dynamic, right? It's similar complicated dynamic when it comes to falling asleep. And so, yeah, I can stop there. I could go on and on about some more of the, I guess one last thing, just to sort of drive home how complicated this is. I have these 2 pictures, and don't worry about trying to understand what's going on here. They're very messy diagrams. I totally get it. The only reason that I'm including these is on the top are the brain regions that are involved in sleep, promoting sleep. And on the bottom, I believe, on the bottom is our brain regions that promote wakefulness. And there has to be this transition between the wakefulness brain regions becoming active and dominating, and then the sleepfulness brain regions becoming active and dominating. And as you can see, there's a bunch of different brain regions, just like all the various components of a watch, right, that are involved. And that transition, if something goes wrong at any one of those little spheres, right, those are all different brain regions, you're going to get disturbed sleep. Okay, so that's my sort of intro to why sleep is so complicated and why so many people struggle with insomnia. The estimate is somewhere around 30% of adults in the United States suffer from a sleep disturbance of some kind, and I've seen about the same estimate for worldwide in terms of
what was the percentage of people? I'm sorry,
30%.
30. Wow, it's a big chunk.
Yeah, it's huge. And of course, these are estimates, right? It's kind of difficult, because not everybody goes and, consults with a physician when they're struggling to sleep. They just think, this is just who I am. It's natural. And so yeah, this is a big issue that a lot of people struggle with.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah. Um,
Mine also was very genetic, like my dad suffers, all his brothers, and then my mom's side, they're the sleepers. They all can just lights out. So, and my dad and my brains have, he's a psychologist, and he's always like, we have similar wiring, and so I feel like could be like genetic too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no question. And I mean, that, again, like all of those different brain regions are contributing to just being able to fall asleep. And so, heritable components, or let's just say genetic components, are involved in every one of those brain regions.
Mhm.
And the way we sort of experience that can be in what's called a chronotype, which is sort of like when you will tend to get sleepy and when you will tend to want to wake up. It's not the same for everybody, and there's definitely a genetic component to that. But then there's also learned behaviors, right? Where
Yeah.
both my parents are night owls, and so who's to say that I grew up watching them go to sleep pretty late, and that just sort of became natural for me. And maybe there wasn't a genetic component to it explicitly, but it was a learned behavior. It's almost certainly a bit of both.
Interesting. Bo has a good question. He says, is there one commonality in insomnia, or is everyone's case different?
Well, yeah,
Is
so
there
there,
a
there definitely
commonality?
there are definitely shared components to it, right? And yes, so so many things can promote sleeplessness, but generally speaking, psychiatric conditions are associated. Obviously anxiety associated conditions, but depression, affective disorders, are just conditions that are psychiatric conditions associated with mood.
Yeah.
And then of course there's like trauma induced psychiatric conditions like PTSD that are definitely associated with insomnia. Insomnia is like, I think, maybe the most, if not one of the most, or it's one of the most, if not the most, commonly reported symptom that people struggling with PTSD report to their physician, that they just cannot fall asleep. And then it has this compounding effect where sleeplessness is known to exacerbate anxiety and depression. But then
exactly.
if you're already suffering from anxiety and depression, that is known to
Exactly.
disturb sleep, right? And so it's this sort of
Yeah.
vicious cycle. So yeah, there
And
are
the
definitely
panic attack.
consistent components.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, Louis
in my
Prova. Oh,
case,
sorry. Go ahead.
I used to. Well, I have CPTSD, and I have chronic anxiety, and
Same.
I've dealt with depression. And I used to have panic attacks every single day, like every single day. And I think one of the medications I'm on right now is the one that's like helping me not to have them. But I the night terrors are also, I think it's part of the PTSD, because I got triggered in my dreams with the nightmares, and it became to a point in my life where I was really afraid to fall asleep. Like, it was night and I was like, I do not want to fall asleep because I do not want to have another of those nightmares. So it's just like this cycle of things that we keep doing that just, I feel it just keeps messing our brain.
I mean, Lucia, that is super common. And in fact, that is a whole domain of research. I almost contributed to a research project with veterans returning from battlefield situations in the Middle East at the VA in Houston. Like there is this whole effort to literally just treat nightmares, like night
Yeah.
terrors. And nightmares are sort of like a hallmark feature of PTSD. And like you're saying, where you began to feel apprehensive to fall asleep because you knew, or that, it's possible that you'll have that experience. That is super common. And in fact, some of the treatments for insomnia involve addressing that in particular, right? Addressing that. And it doesn't even have to be conscious, right? That like you consciously are aware, oh, I might have this dream, and so I don't want to go to sleep. It can be completely subconscious or unconscious.
Yeah.
But even still, you experience that fight or flight as you're trying to fall asleep, which is obviously counterproductive. You're not getting that handoff of wakefulness promoting brain regions, fight or flight, sleepfulness. And so, yeah, that is classic. And in fact, there is a medication that not a lot of medications have been shown to be very effective in treating insomnia. But there is this one, and I meant to write it down. Shoot, but is it something like? Oh well, gosh, I'll
It's a
find it.
benzo. No
I'm
benzo.
sorry.
It's not a benzo.
No, it's not a
Like,
benzo. It's actually an alpha-1 adrenergic antagonist. So here, actually, let me just because it might be, yeah, here we go. So prazosin, okay. It seems to be pretty useful specifically for the treatment of sleep disturbances associated with trauma, and specifically people diagnosed with PTSD. It turns out like benzodiazepines are some of the more commonly prescribed drugs just worldwide. But
Yeah.
yeah,
there's
but they
really
know
not a
that
lot. I'm sorry, go ahead.
know that the benzos they won't. I mean, it's not. They just like address a little of maybe calming yourself, or I take at night, but it doesn't take away the. It has. Well, I had sleep paralysis too, and for some reason I'm not having that lately. So I think one of the 200 medications I'm taking it's working. I don't know, but
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
studies have explored, many different categories of drugs. So, I've seen studies that explored antidepressants, think SSRIs, adrenergic inhibitors, which is the kind of drug that I just mentioned, antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, and non-benzodiazepine hypnotics. So think like Ambien. And so I just listed 5 families of medications, right, that
Yeah.
have all been used to try and treat PTSD and sleep disturbances specifically. And so
Mhm.
when you hear something like that, that sort of indicates that we really just don't have ideal medications, right, to treat either of these sources of suffering. And, we're lucky to have them around because it certainly they can improve quality of life quite a bit. But yeah, so there have been assessments of all these categories of drugs, just how effective they are. And just to cut to the chase, this medication, probably not one that many people have heard of for the treatment of PTSD, this prazosin. The brand names are Minipress, Vasoflex, Lentopress. And as I said, it's an adrenergic blocker, which basically what it has been used for classically is to treat cardiovascular conditions. But it just turns out that it seems to be the single most effective medication so far, given these assessments, in addressing specifically night terrors and nightmares associated with PTSD.
And
Interesting.
it, and,
What
and
would
that
like
is that
sorry.
medication like available on, or is it something that's still on the on what's it called? Hi guys.
In development, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, in
it's
development.
available. It's not a super new drug. It's just like
Okay.
it's not a drug that you would intuitively consider to be useful for psychiatric conditions, right? Because it's prescribed for heart-related conditions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there is some pretty good evidence to suggest that it. And the other nice thing is that it doesn't have like profound psychoactive effects. Like benzodiazepines are sedating, right? That's partly why they're so useful. Antipsychotics, atypical antipsychotics, antidepressants, they all have they
A
all
bunch
alter your
of
state of
side
consciousness.
effects.
Yeah, and side effects, and every medication it has side effects, but this one could potentially be useful for somebody who's struggling with their medications. They're not really working as effectively, or the side effects are sort of prohibitively severe. This might be an option, and so it might be worth bringing up, right, with your physician, just a conversation. The evidence is pretty supportive, and so if I were in the position of somebody who's struggling with my medication, or they're just not working very much for me, it's a conversation I might have with my physician.
Yeah, I'm gonna. I used to take olanzapine. That's like
Mm-hmm.
the
Zyprexa.
uh-huh. And but that thing, I mean, it would put me to sleep like in a flash, but in a week I blew up like a balloon. So I was
Yeah.
drinking that. I was taking that with a lot of other. I was taking at that moment Paxil, which is an
Paxil. Yeah.
antidepressant. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
And that guy at the end, he put me with a bunch of medication that just basically blew up my liver too. So I was like, can we just change it, because I'm not feeling okay. I mean, I know the medications are supposed to make me feel better, but if it's not happening, you should listen also to the patient and try something new. I mean, if I'm dealing with depression and I'm gaining like 10 pounds a week, it's not going to help me either. So I stopped taking that one, and I changed my psychiatrist, and the first thing he did was just take me off all of that. But yeah, I still struggle a lot.
Yeah, I just didn't personally find that any medication was helpful enough to warrant being on it. So I've gotten off all of my stuff just because the only thing that sort of would help was the benzodiazepines. And I just have this fear of it messing with my brain like I had been prescribed them first in about ninth grade. And so when I hit, 25, I was like, okay, I've literally been on these for 10 years
Most of
already. And
them.
I was noticing that the first couple hours of my waking day, I would then reflect back on it and not really remember much. It was like it was causing memory problems, which freaked me out because I'd always had such a good memory. So I got off
Mhm.
the benzos and stuff, and I tried a couple weird off-label medications too. Like they gave me, of course, they love to try trazodone, and that just like I would wake up frozen. It wouldn't necessarily help me go to sleep. It would help me stay asleep. I didn't remember my dreams, but then when I would wake up, I felt like I couldn't move. And then the other weird one that I tried was like gabapentin, which I was like, what? That was a bizarre one too. So I don't know if that's, what do you think about those?
Yeah, I mean, um, I so I empathize. Again, I'm a scientist, not a physician, right? But I
Right.
empathize with physicians because the reality is we don't have great answers, and their goal is to find something that works for you and your lifestyle and your quality of life. And because we don't have an ideal solution, you just sort of have there is a little bit of trial and error. And
Yeah.
benzodiazepines are absolutely helpful for the treatment of certain instances of anxiety, right? Like crisis
Yeah.
moments, anxiety attacks,
Yeah.
panic
That's what I
attacks.
save them for. It's like I need it to work for a panic attack and not like just to
Mhm.
fall asleep every night.
Yeah,
So,
when science, so like I'm glad to live in a time in human history where we have these tools available, right? I just want to make it clear that I'm
Yeah.
not like completely skeptical of medicine at all. But like when scientists have scrutinized the actual evidence to support the use of a variety of medications, right, it turns out that benzos just don't seem to be particularly helpful for the treatment of trauma related sleep disturbances.
Hmm.
And these are studies that were randomized placebo controlled studies, the sort of the gold standard, right? And to be fair, these studies only focused on two benzos, alprazolam or Xanax, and clonazepam, Klonopin. But honestly, those are probably pretty representative of like some of the most regularly
Yeah,
prescribed
exactly.
benzos.
Those are like the other than that, the others are more like light. So if those two doesn't work, I don't think the others are gonna do much.
Yeah, I mean, they all basically do the same thing. It's just a matter of how potent they are, but also like how long they last. Some are longer lasting, like Valium
yeah.
or diazepam last quite a long time, whereas alprazolam is far shorter acting. But they all essentially do the same thing. And what they found is that benzos, while obviously they have applications, they actually didn't have any advantage over placebo. And this is again trauma related sleep disturbances.
Hmm.
And we know that Veda, you were talking about how the sort of, let's say, how nutritious the sleep was, right? That there have been studies that show that benzos do increase time asleep, unsurprisingly, right? But they change what's called sleep architecture. And so, as we're falling asleep, we go from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 and 4, and then REM sleep. And we can get deeper into that if you like. But basically, it's just about going deeper and deeper into sleep, right, where the brain is getting slower and more rhythmic, as time goes on, and
Yeah.
then you hit REM sleep, which is when we think most vivid dreams occur.
Mhm.
And so it turns out that benzodiazepines increase stage 2, the duration of stage 2 in non-REM sleep, right? But then
Interesting.
there's a decrease in
Oh,
stage 3 of non-REM sleep, and then reduced REM sleep as well, right? So pretty much any
Yeah.
drug that alters your state of consciousness, alcohol, nicotine. Nicotine has some really interesting effects on dreams and stuff like that. But pretty
Really?
much any
I
drug.
used
Can you
Oh yeah,
elaborate
yeah.
on
I
that?
I,
I'm not a
I quit
nicotine user, but
smoking.
I'm
Eh?
curious. Oh, I'm just curious about nicotine's effect. I've never heard of that.
Sure. So you know, I remember when I was younger, back in the early days of the internet, I would read these stories of people who would intentionally, they wanted to try and lucid dream, or just amplify, make their dreams more vivid, and they would go to sleep with nicotine patches on. Even they're not smokers or anything like that.
Really?
Yeah, and I haven't seen like a good explanation for why it would have this effect, but I think we can pretty reasonably accurately speculate that nicotine binds a certain neurotransmitter receptor called the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. So acetylcholine is one of our neurotransmitters, just like dopamine, serotonin. And so acetylcholine regulates memory. It regulates so many things. It's one of the biggest signaling systems in our brain, and nicotine binds those receptors, activates them. And so, we also don't really understand that much about what produces dreams. I mean, we could talk about that. There's been research, but there's no like dream center of the brain, right? But we are absolutely certain that acetylcholine regulates sleep, participates in regulating sleep and memory. And, we know that these brain regions, some of the brain regions in those messy diagrams that I showed you, are regulated by acetylcholine. And so, it is unsurprising, therefore, that nicotine would have some effect on dreams. And so, yeah, that is a fairly regularly recognized effect of nicotine, is rendering dreams more vivid.
Weird. So I noticed, and this
I was go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I noticed that because the one thing that I do use is weed for my insomnia, and that's helped astronomically. But before I went to the THC, I was trying the CBD thing because everyone said that would help the best. But the only thing I noticed with the CBD, and I don't know if it's my brain itself, was that I was getting the most intense lucid dreams. And I was like, no way is it the CBD. So I tried it again. Same thing happened. Then my girlfriend at the time also did it. Also had lucid dreams. And I have never been a lucid dreamer. It's never been a thing. If anything, I wake up, my dream's gone, or they're really weird, but they aren't lucid. I was literally unsure if I had fallen asleep or not the whole night. It was the weirdest thing. So I don't do that anymore, but I don't know what that is. Is that the same thing as nicotine?
Right. Well, so yeah, I mean, it does influence, activity in the nervous system. But I'm curious, just before we get into it, did CBD help you fall asleep?
Well, I didn't even know if I had slept. It was just odd. It was like I kind of just felt like I was in that state before sleep all night. And I'm sure I did sleep because I was not tired enough to have not slept. Like if I don't sleep, or I only sleep 2 or 3 hours, I'm an insomniac, but I need a lot. So it sucks. But I definitely felt rested-ish. So I knew I had slept, but it was very different sleep for me.
Yeah, I tried CBD, and at first it like knocked me out, but I don't know if my body makes resistant. I'm very resistant to obviously all medications or everything that's supposed to make me smooth that down. But after like the first thing, it didn't do anything. But I used to smoke, but I do not remember. I mean, I used to smoke cigarettes. I used to smoke like a pack a day. I quit 6 years ago. Yeah. But
congrats, that's hard.
I do remember, yeah, it was like, oh, it takes your anxiety away, but it's not. It's like I was a chain smoker. It was like more.
Classic. And there's actually studies that show, this was a lot of what I did in my research, but there's studies that show smokers will say the reason I smoke cigarettes is to control my anxiety, and that is super duper common. Particularly as people develop a habit. But
I always thought nicotine was like
yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I couldn't stop.
It does relieve anxiety, but like in the very, very short term. But if you measure like heart rate and something called galvanic skin response, basically the things that happen to our body when we get anxious, over the course of the day, as more cigarettes are smoked, anxiety indicators actually increase steadily. And so you're basically just going like that, right? With each cigarette, you go down and then you go higher than you were before. Anyways, sorry, I just, that's a fascinating component of nicotine.
Super
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Lucia.
No, that's exactly what it is. And I remember that when I started realizing that I had, that there was like a connection, I tried to stop smoking. I don't know, maybe at 6 p.m. because if I had a cigarette before bed, it was like, my heart would go. It became. I spent so long untreated with anxiety and all that now I have to drink. Now I have to take a pill for my BPM because when I used to, have the nightmares or the sleep terrors and all that, my heart rate was up to like 125. So of course I'm not gonna be able to sleep. My heart is like all the way, and that's like that was my regular. It never went down.
Gotcha. Yeah,
So
that's interesting. So, I mean, another thing that hopefully we can talk about, if you're interested, are the sort of the short-term consequences of sleep disturbances, sleep deprivation, and then the long-term consequences, because you bring up your cardiovascular system, and that is a key part of the longer-term
yeah,
consequences. But to go back to the cannabinoids, CBD is one of these interesting. So the endogenous cannabinoid signaling system, the receptors to which THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, and CBD bind, they bind different receptors, but they're both in the same family of receptors. It's one of the broadest signaling systems in our body. I said that about the acetylcholine signaling system, similar with the endogenous cannabinoid signaling system. And because it is so widespread throughout our nervous system, THC, CBD, any drug that would bind these receptors can influence a huge variety of things. And these are huge receptors, right? And so there's a lot of genetic differences in, Veda, what your, cannabinoid receptor will look like, Lucia's, and then mine, right? Even within the same family, you can have some slight differences. And so as a result, some people, it's wonderful that some people find CBD to be effective for, and THC to be effective for sleep disturbances. But then some people, it actually exacerbates their sleep disturbance. And so, and of course, like every other drug, certainly not unique to cannabinoids, they will influence your sleep cycle, but some sleep is better than zero sleep.
mm-hmm.
And so, CBD it seems particularly diverse in effects, in how it affects different people, depending upon their genetic
maybe
background.
Exactly, or maybe if my insomnia wasn't more like trauma PTSD related, it would help me more. But
Yeah, that's what I
and
was
same
thinking.
with melatonin. I used to, but when I drink melatonin, I have the worst nightmares and like cold sweats, and I was like, this shouldn't be happening. Like this is like a natural thing. And then I started like asking around, and I had some people that they also had to stop taking it because it made them have nightmares, and I was like, yeah, no more. It's like
Interesting.
I've been going through my life, and it's like, nope, this one doesn't work. Doesn't work.
Yeah, right.
Doesn't work.
That's interesting. I actually hadn't seen evidence. I hadn't, not that I looked very, comprehensively, but that melatonin can exacerbate nightmares. That's interesting. So I just, Bo Adams brings up an interesting topic where I've read that you can never make up for lost sleep. Is that true? Sort of. Yes, kind of. But something interesting happens. Something interesting happens.
Bo?
What happened?
So something interesting happens when we are deprived of sleep, right? So as I was saying, we have these different phases of sleep: stage 1, 2, 3, 4, REM. Okay, and different things happen in our brain during those different phases, right? REM sleep is, if you were to look at brain activity in somebody who's in REM, it'll look almost like they're awake, whereas the earlier stages is just it's called slow wave sleep, and so it's just far slower, less activity. But so it turns out that let's say you've gone 2-3 days of only getting a couple hours of sleep. You're not getting the sufficient nutrition that you need from sleep. When you do finally fall asleep, which you will eventually fall asleep, you have something called a REM rebound, where instead of being sort of a normal stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, you have this dilation of REM sleep. So you'll have extra REM. It's like your brain is trying to make up for lost time, but it is going to be a different experience of sleep because, again, you're having this dilated specific phase of sleep as opposed to the standard, proportions. And so, you don't quite make up for lost sleep, but you kind of do. So yeah, maybe not a satisfying answer, but it is an interesting topic.
I have a question about REM. I've read that, for example, that's the part of, because I became, at was a point I became obsessed. So with the with the phone and the my watch, I could like regulate, and it would give me how many hours of light sleep, deep sleep, and REM I was having.
Mhm, mhm.
And then I started doing my research, and it's true. It in REM, that's supposed to be the moment that people with trauma or PTSD sort of like work. I don't know, like that's the part of the sleep that usually helps us to not cure, but that's
Not
where
go,
we work.
keeps us from
I don't
going
know exactly. I
chaotic.
don't know the word, but I read that's the part of this. Like we should have more time of REM sleep in order to be able to get better or something like
So
that.
I mean, the challenge here is that we're fairly confident that REM sleep. So REM stands for rapid eye movement. Just in case
Mm-hmm.
anybody would keep saying REM, it's like
In a
a
band.
band, REM. Yeah, exactly. And that is the phase of sleep when we think that we're pretty sure that people have dreams, like technically have dreams during those earlier phases, right? Non-REM sleep, but the dreams that we have just because there's brain activity occurring, right? But during REM, it's a slightly more. The pattern of brain activity looks more like you're awake, and that is when we think that most dreams occur. And so, for somebody with PTSD who's experiencing nightmares, right, and who recurrently, right, it's not like just one time where they know that, as you were describing, let's say, like as you start going to sleep, you have this fight or flight reaction because that the prospect of having a nightmare, a severe nightmare, reliving trauma, right? That
Yeah.
is, that is a severe experience, not to be taken lightly, right? And so it's not like it's deranged to be apprehensive, right? To that might happen, and then also something
Yeah, because
interesting
those
about.
nightmares, sorry, are usually, I relieve part of what happened, and
Mhm.
that's why it becomes such an intense nightmare, and you
Totally,
wake
and
up feeling so like triggered because you're like reliving
absolutely.
again
You're
all
quite
the
literally
trauma.
triggered, right? Like the
Hmm.
classic, definition of the term triggered, right?
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Like a bad
and
dream hangover.
yeah, kind of, yeah. But so something interesting about trauma related, and nightmare related sleep disturbances is that generally speaking, when people who are fortunate to not have lived through trauma have a nightmare. I mean, everybody has nightmares. They tend to be
Yeah.
sort of exotic and weird and imaginative, and not necessarily based on anything that actually happened to you, right? It's just sort of like whatever, some weird nightmare. When it comes to
Random.
people with PTSD, who experience night terrors, it is much more realistic. At least it's a consistent feature among people who report it. It's much more based off of that past experience, and so it's not only is it a nightmare, but as you were saying, you're really reliving that trauma
Yeah.
in a way, and so you are that is a common experience, and that is why there's been so much attention towards trying to treat the nightmares, like literally treat the nightmares, and not just the inability to fall asleep. And there's also
Yeah.
evidence, and I'll stop after this. There's also evidence that for a lot of psychiatric conditions, including PTSD, specifically treating sleep associated disturbances yields benefits for the broader psychiatric condition, right? And so rather than trying to treat the anxiety only, right, only treat the anxiety, or only treat the depression, or only treat the PTSD, if you can confront the sleep related condition, I'm
Okay.
sorry, the sleep symptoms, that can be beneficial for the
Hmm.
broader psychiatric condition. It's an interesting way to think about psychiatric conditions.
Well, I
Yeah.
would love that because it's like that's the worst side effect, I can say, like in my experience. It's the lack of sleep and sometimes being afraid of falling asleep because I'll have, maybe I'll have a nightmare. So it's also like a predisposition of your brain that, oh, or maybe if I fall asleep, I'm gonna have a nightmare. Like I'm gonna have a nightmare, and then you have it. It's in here. I don't know. I mean, I'm just talking about,
Well, you see, I
you
mean,
know.
and then another interesting thing is, so we can talk about some, we've talked a bit about the medications that are used to try and help people attain, nutritious sleep, and then there's also, non, medication based treatments, and one of the interesting ones that I had never actually thought about is, because specifically for this reason, specifically for that apprehension that people develop following trauma, if instead of trying to fall asleep when you get in bed, and I'm not saying you specifically, just like, this is one of these strategies that is used. Instead of trying, getting in bed, trying to fall asleep, knowing that you're going to fail, experiencing that just sort of like, cycle of, I'm going to be so sleep deprived, this is terrible, you get anxious,
overthinking,
right? The next day, right? Instead of doing that, actually get in bed and try to stay awake.
Yes,
which is sort of like
started doing this, Ian. I have just started doing this because I listened to this weird sleep meditation. It's all about this. It's my new jam. It's been kind of working for the last week. But because my thing was like always the dread of not even the nightmares, because at this point I know that's sad to say, I would rather have a nightmare than not sleep, because it's so miserable not to sleep. 100%. So I always was like the anxiety of like not sleeping, the dread of not sleeping, that was my thing. But the second I started like just going into bed, not with the idea to sleep, but like I'll put on a meditation and be like, it's fine if I don't sleep. It's fine. I don't know. Anyways, it also helps not to have something to do in the morning. That changes the whole scenario. But interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And how, I
never would have thought about that.
Okay. And how does that work? I mean, I just go to bed and what?
Well, I mean, it's just a difference in intention, right? And again, not a physician, this is, I'm just reading the research here. One of the non-pharmaceutical treatments is that you get in bed specifically with the intention to not fall asleep. But of course, so you're not watching TV, you're not doing stuff like that, right? You're in bed trying to stay awake. Evidently, that can be quite beneficial for folks, specifically, again, who are apprehensive due to night terrors.
Yes.
So yeah.
I know it's kind of hard to explain that concept to someone who's like, oh, I get in bed and try not to sleep. But Lucia, to try to explain it, the meditation that I listened to that sort of put this into my mind was you keep your eyes open. And she literally was like, keep your eyes open, pretend you're looking up. And then the person leading the meditation, then after about 5 minutes of that, says, okay, now close your eyes. You are literally like, they're just blinking. They just want to close so bad. And you're like, I mean, I'm not saying it's something that might work every night, but I'll send you that meditation and see what you think. Cause
this woman that I told you, the ASMR hypnopsychologist that I found on YouTube, and she does that. It's like, okay, I know like your eyes are heavy, but no, like don't close your eyes, don't close your eyes.
Meditation.
And then you're like, but
yeah. I wanted to interject because someone had asked a question and I didn't want to ignore it, but they said it would be fascinating if each hemisphere sets its own sleep cycle in split brain patients who have severed corpus callosums. Is it regulated by a common brain structure? I don't know what that means, but do you, Ian?
So Daryl always brings the topics, but yeah. So a split brain patient is basically so we have two hemispheres of the brain, right, left and right. Generally speaking, we have the same brain structures on either side. Like you have a hippocampus on this side and on that side, right, for almost every brain region, and they communicate with one another, right, through this dense network of fibers that connect both hemispheres. And that dense network of fibers is called the corpus callosum. And for some folks with severe epilepsy, nothing is working for them, no medication. They need to undergo surgery to prevent a seizure from spreading throughout the rest of their brain. And one of the things, it's a very intense procedure, only for extreme cases, is to sever the connectivity between the hemispheres by severing the corpus callosum. And so Daryl is basically suggesting that, and what happens is that there's very, very little communication between the hemispheres as a result. There's still some. It's not the only part of the brain where the hemispheres interact, but by and large, it's a huge change. And so if you're falling asleep, both hemispheres are technically falling asleep, but if they're not influencing one another nearly to the same degree, you definitely would get some asymmetry in brain activity. But that said, even you, me, and us with intact corpus callosa, we already have asymmetric brain activity when we fall asleep. It's not like a perfectly symmetrical. It's not like you have activity here and here at the same time, no matter what, when you're sleeping. There is asymmetry already. But I think it would be emphasized in a split brain patient. Great topic, Daryl.
Yeah, I also, I have okay, I've been under a lot of, well, because I suffer from migraines and my also some stuff in my brain, and most of the medications that I've been that have are the same medications that they give to people with epilepsy. They are anti-convulsant. Is that the word?
Yep. Yep.
So right now okay, but I'm having. Well, I used to drink uh, fluoxetine.
Fluoxetine. Yeah, that's Prozac.
Yeah,
Oh,
and I also right now I'm on topiramato, which is
Topiramate.
to
Yeah.
and I lost my train of thought. What I was trying to say about that. I'm just
Oh,
I
no
don't
worries.
remember at all.
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. No.
okay.
So yeah, don't worry about it. I mean, basically, I think what you're bringing up is it is quite common, again, because we don't have really any excellent treatments for sleep disturbances, and insomnia. Doctors really have to improvise, and this is actually a very controversial topic within medicine, psychiatry in particular. We know that anticonvulsant drugs, right, epilepsy medications like topiramate, um, we know that one of the major side effects, as well as antipsychotics,
Mhm.
we know that one of the major side effects is sedation. That is like one of the things that pretty much
Yeah.
everybody who's prescribed these medications for, and who need the prescription, need the medication to live a high quality of life. To be clear, but essentially everybody notes that, man, I'm so groggy, and so in some cases physicians will be like, hey, maybe a side effect, it's not going to be a bug, it's a feature when it comes to trying to help somebody fall asleep. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not unusual. But yeah, hopefully we'll be able to, in the next few years, we'll be able to find something that is a little bit
One.
more
You just
targeted.
need one pill instead of
Yes.
taking 10, which is
Yeah.
maybe
I
not
don't want
one.
any pills. I don't want any pills. I'm so done with that. I mean, knock on wood. Sleepwalking. I know that's like a loaded topic, but also in extreme sleep disturbance. And my upstairs neighbor has just informed me that he is a sleepwalker and not to be alarmed if I hear things crashing around in the night. So,
What?
briefly, could you touch
Wow.
on sleepwalking, or is that a whole topic in
Well,
itself?
when I
Sure.
tried Ambien and I just couldn't because that thing, I mean, it was so weird. Like it's vivid. You sleepwalk. I had entire conversations with people and I had no recollection at all. And I was like, no, Ambien, no, you're not going to do it for me.
Yeah, I mean, so Ambien is one of those non-benzodiazepine hypnotics, and it's a whole family of drugs. What's nice about them, they are effective in getting people to fall asleep, but one of the classic side effects of this whole
Mm,
family of drugs is it's like sleepwalking, essentially. And so, okay, so and it can be very, very dangerous, to be clear. Like people can engage in
yeah.
rather dangerous behavior, getting in cars and things like that, right? Trying to cut something with a knife, and of course they're technically asleep, and so
Yeah,
that can be a little
Ion
dangerous.
upstairs says
Exactly.
his biggest offense is he goes to the fridge for something sweet.
Yeah. Oh, and
But
that is classic. Eating an
yeah,
entire pint of ice cream, which I'll do even not under the influence of Ambien, but when you don't intend to, it's kind of a different story. Particularly since you can't even remember how delicious it was. But okay, so sleepwalking, very interesting topic, and there are certain conditions like formally recognized conditions that are associated with what we would informally call sleepwalking. The most classic of which being what's called REM behavioral disorder. And I have this video somewhere on my website. I mean, don't worry about it. Where there's a video of a dude, he's getting a sleep study done, and it's a crappy
You have a
video because they.
website? Sorry, I need to go
I'll,
to your website. I
I'll
had no
post it in the
idea.
I'll post it
Yeah,
in the
post it in
chat
the
when I find
comments.
it. But so they're using like a potato to film this guy, unfortunately. But you can sort of see he's in bed and he's in this sort of like reclined position, just sort of like casually, and it looks like he's sort of smoking, a cigarette, like a star in a French film or something, right? Just sort of like very gracefully doing the little tap thing that people do to ash their cigarette, and it's so graceful and it looks so much like he's awake, but he's actually deeply asleep. Okay, so
creepy.
what's going on there? So as I was saying, that handoff of brain activity, this whole constellation of brain regions that promote being awake, they have to hand off activity to a different constellation of brain regions that promote falling asleep. And part of that handoff is essentially, it occurs in a part of the brain, in the brainstem, actually, the reticular activating system, also the pontine nuclei, but basically they paralyze you. So they make it so that movement signals, the intention to move, cannot get beyond the brainstem out into your voluntary musculature. And that's important because
So
we
you
evolved
don't
to have
act.
precisely. So you're not reacting physically to, you know, the experiences that you're having during, you know, REM sleep and while you're dreaming. To be clear, like, there is some movement, right? Like, everybody, it's actually very important to be able to move a little bit while you sleep, and, you know, motor, like muscle twitches. Like, I always put my daughter to bed, and it's kind of interesting to watch. I mean, you see this in puppies too, where they're like, it'll look like they're sort of engaging in subtle behaviors, right?
Yeah.
They're sort of like, you know, trying to run or something. And that's very important for development, right? But if that paralysis mechanism, for one reason or another, doesn't become activated, right, doesn't put up that filter of brain activity, then there's nothing to prevent those movement signals that you're experiencing when you're sleeping from then reaching your musculature. Now, the flip side of that is sleep paralysis, right? And so I can't.
Oh my God!
I think, Lucia, you brought up sleep paralysis.
Yes.
And so what that is, for anybody who's unfamiliar, is this experience of either as you're falling asleep or more commonly when you're waking up, you are paralyzed. You cannot move, even though you're mostly awake. And what's interesting about sleep paralysis is that people oftentimes also have hallucinations where they hallucinate, and they're actually rather consistent hallucinations where they'll perceive there being an intruder in their room, standing over them.
Why is that so common that when you're awoken by sleep paralysis, per se, is that like a lot of people have the feeling of almost being like weighed down, or like like there's a presence
or
of
see someone or a shadow, or
can you explain that in the brain? I know spiritual people,
all types of things.
Yeah,
and it's really
so yeah, and that is pretty consistent. I mean, okay, so just, you know, the reason that this is sort of the flip side of sleepwalking is that same brain region that's supposed to be turning off as we're waking up, while the sleepfulness constellation of brain regions is handing off to the wakefulness. If it doesn't turn off, then you're still paralyzed. But other brain regions are waking up, right? And so you're in this sort of pseudo waking state while you're paralyzed. Okay, but you're not entirely awake, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so why would there be this aversive experience, right? Well, I mean, first of all, the realization that you're paralyzed, that is intrinsically aversive, right? That's scary. And so, you know, intrinsically you will, you know, experience the experience of threat, of fight or flight, right? And you know, we're talking about very primitive or let's say brain regions that are, you know, very, very simple. They've evolutionarily ancient. They're in essentially any animal you can look at, right? And so, or that you can name. And so, you know, you're in this fight or flight state. You're still kind of asleep. And so, what are some of the most consistent sources of fear that people have, right? It is being intruded, or you know, an intrusion, or somebody. There can be a consistent experience of being, you know, sexually violated. And, you know, again, you're in this sort of like aversive state, and so you're experiencing these primitive sources of fear. And so, you know, I can't say that scientists know for sure why these are the consistent ones, but I think it's safe to say, and I've read other, you know, scientists make this argument, that it's because you're experiencing some of the most primitive sources of terror, and because you're still kind of sleeping, you can actually experience them, you can perceive them, and then they go away once, you know, you're finally able to begin moving. But yeah, and we could talk about, like, you know, well, yeah. So that is sort of like the part of an explanation for why it is that we sleep.
When I used to have it, it was, and then you're just like, I was trying to, at that time I used to live with a roommate, and I was like trying to like scream or say something because I was feeling that there was someone in the room or there was something going on, and and you feel like there's an hour that went by, and it's just like basically seconds, minutes maybe that you spend like that, but what you're are feeling at that same moment. It's like it's going on forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. And time perception is completely disrupted. I mean, this is a classic feature of dreams where you can feel like,
Mhm.
you, my favorite is when you just, and this has only happened to me like once or twice, where you just like close your eyes and then you feel like you just open them immediately, but it's like morning all of a sudden. That is just so surreal for me. But then, you can feel like you've been asleep for weeks, right? The dream, you've been asleep for weeks, but obviously in reality you haven't. And it's because time perception is also a byproduct of brain activity, and activity in the brain is fallible, right? The brain is certainly not a perfect engine of consciousness. It's messy, it makes mistakes. And so as a result, when you're in this altered state of consciousness while you're paralyzed, you're experiencing sleep paralysis, time dilation can happen, right? And we
Mhm.
know psychoactive drugs, particularly hallucinogens, psychedelic hallucinogens, definitely can have this effect where people will feel like they've been sitting and watching, looking at whatever a piece of art for like 15 years, right?
Mhm.
Or you can feel like, wait a second, has it been like 3 hours already? I feel like it's been 5 minutes, right? Super
Yeah.
interesting effect. Cannabis can have this effect a little bit too,
Oh, for sure.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you have anything else to share or add? We're approaching the hour, but did you have any other like slides and stuff? Or did
So
you
I don't
share
even have any slides, but I do think it might
We're
be
like,
useful, and I'll do this quickly. Are the effects of sleep disruption, right?
Yeah.
There are short-term and there are long-term effects. So short-term, just you've had a couple days of sleep deprivation for whatever reason, people become more responsive to stressful experiences. There's an increased activation of what's called the autonomic nervous system or sympathetic nervous system. There are a bunch of byproducts of that, but basically you get everything from cardiovascular changes, heart-related changes, to
yeah.
increased prothrombic responses, meaning an increased proclivity to clot, for blood to clot. There's
Really?
somatic issues that can come. Yeah, and which is potentially associated with stroke. We know sleep deprivation is associated with stroke. And then there's somatic problems. So people are more likely to experience more severe pain, headaches, abdominal pain. And then there's, of course, psychosocial issues, associated with, depression, anxiety, but also,
Yeah.
and this is not surprising, disrupted attention and vigilance, executive function, things like that,
Mhm.
emotional activity. And we
Yeah.
know this is particularly true for children. And then, the long term, it's sort of like worse versions of that, right? We know that there's elevated blood pressure, increased risk of hypertension, developing hypertension, higher BMI, body mass index, not the perfect measure of weight or anything, but it's just one way to measure it. Increased risk of cardiovascular disease, increased risk of type 2 diabetes, developing, type 2 diabetes. And, even cancer, this is a little bit freakier, but studies have shown that there's a relationship between long-term sleep deprivation and accelerated tumor formation and just increased risks of cancer. And then, the last one is that there have been studies that just look at all-cause mortality. So just, people dying when they shouldn't. And
Right.
studies show that there is a correlation between, consistent sleep deprivation and increased risks of all-cause mortality in both men and women. So this is
Yikes.
not a trivial issue.
So okay, this is a okay. I just got. I had a brain tumor, so it might be related to the fact that I've been so long, having all this.
So that, well, the studies have shown, these studies have been done in both, animal models, rodents, as well as in humans. So for rodents, what they saw was accelerated tumor growth. So the tumor was already there, but the tumor grew more rapidly. In
Hmm.
women, studies have shown sleep deprivation or sleep disturbances is associated with increased risks of breast cancer. In men, increased risks of prostate cancer.
Yeah.
Also, there was a study in nurses, notoriously one of the most challenging jobs, particularly over the past year and a half, that there's an increased risk of colorectal cancer in nurses who report
Ooh.
sleep disturbances. And so yeah, I mean, this is, I only bring all this up just because I think, some folks are interested, but also, it's not a trivial issue. Sleep is a really important part of, your lifespan, but also your health span, like how healthy you are as you live longer. And so I'm so grateful that you both, invited me to come chat with you. I hope we can chat again. And it
Yeah.
was my
Yeah,
pleasure.
for sure.
Thanks for having me.
so many topics to be discussed, I feel like.
Yeah.
I'm game.
No, and also I just that's part of I wanted to give it. We wanted because we talk about this all the time, being awake, Veda and I, but having someone to give you an explanation of what's actually going on in your brain, it also makes it real for people who do not suffer from any of this, that they just say like, well, maybe if you try changing the way you eat. I mean, I've done everything and it's still there because my brain, it's not the same. I mean, brain with PTSD, it's not the same brain of someone who just happens to have had a long work week and can't get sleep. It's not the same. So often people try to minimize the impact of insomnia and other sleep deprivation on people like I don't want to say like me, but yeah, with when you're dealing with mental health or any other stuff, they always try to minimize. So having you here, it's like, guys, it's the brain. He's talking about
Yeah,
the brain. It's real. It's happening.
and so
It's not.
maybe next
We're
time
not
we can chat
being
about.
melodramatic.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, yeah, exactly right. And so maybe next time we can chat about. We talked a bit about the pharmacological, the medication-based treatments. Maybe next time we can talk about some of the non-pharmacological strategies that have been shown to be effective for folks who suffer from sleep
Yeah,
disturbances.
that would be awesome.
So that there's 6 that
I
I
think
put
this
together.
needs like a part 2.
Yeah, everyone says that.
game.
Well, Bo said that. Bo's everyone. That's fine. Bo can speak for the collective.
So for people who doesn't, follow Ian, you should. You often go live on Sundays, right? Sunday or Saturday, and it's always a really interesting conversation around a lot of topics. So if you're not following him, you should. And yeah, it was really great. I the time went by. I didn't even realize we had 1 hour here talking. So
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, you
Thank
blocked
you for
Ian,
agreeing
though?
to do this.
Ian, have you ever been blocked before? Because just kidding. Bo's being silly, but we love him.
But yeah, it would be really interesting to make another one and just talk about the non-medications ways to that we've done that too. So we can we can talk about our experience and Ian can come and knowledge all of us.
Yes, knowledge us.
Knowledge us.
Knowledge
So
us.
yeah, thank you for being here. It was really fun.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone. I haven't read like most of the comments, but I will at one point. But thank you everyone who left some interesting questions here. I like that it is, a space where people can just ask or they feel related to whatever it is that we're talking about. And, it's okay. We're not alone. There's a lot of people that that happens to be going through the same thing. So, yeah.
Especially like the internet people. I feel like we have solidarity in the insomnia.
Yes. Yes. That is another very interesting topic is the sort of enrichment of people who struggle with sleep in online communities as well as gaming communities. That's like a classic feature of those.
There's like a
Well,
solidarity,
those
but
guys
we
will
also
go
might.
for hours, man, gaming like online.
Yeah,
That's
like,
almost addictive.
are we enabling each other? Or are we, solidarity? Like,
Yeah, comforting each other. Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Ian,
So-
thank you so much for being here.
Thank
And thanks,
you. Yes.
Luva, for letting me, sneak in on this subject. So
Of course, we
look
came
forward to
up with
you.
this.
It sounds like it's
We're gonna
happening.
keep doing it.
Yeah. Great. All right.
And thank you everyone in the comments. And we'll see you guys soon next week. I don't know. Soon.
Soon sounds great.
So bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.